Thanks for joining me for video number 3 of the Presentation Bootcamp. I'm Michael Best, the founder of Spotted Rhino Designs. In the last 2 videos, we have covered work that needs to happen as you prepare to start putting together your next presentation. Now we get to actually work on what we are going to say when we start our presentation, which is one of the most critical elements to get right. Which is probably why so many people ask me how they should start their presentation. And when asked, I say, well, you should do what the experts do. And usually, when I say that, I get a puzzled look from them and they say, aren't you the presentation expert? And usually I chuckle and say, yes, I am. But there's a group that has taken the presentation art to a new level. When was the last time you saw a movie? This is one of my favorite weekend activities. But you see, the storytelling industry has changed and morphed over the years, and we can learn a lot from their evolution. Almost all of us have seen the movie Casablanca, but do you remember how the movie started? Casablanca starts with 7 minutes of credits. 7 minutes! That's valuable screen time taken up by telling the audience a bunch of stuff they really don't care about. But it was a different day and age in the 1940s, and you could get away with that. Today, we can't. If you start out with 30 seconds of shout-outs and thank yous, you're all but written off. Have you noticed how movies of today start? Lots of action, mystery, and intrigue, well before any credits are given. I mean, The Lord of the Rings begins with the creation of the 20 powerful rings, and the plight and travels of the most powerful ring all the way to the hands of an unsuspecting hobbit. Or The Gladiator, opening with a scene of an introspective and loved Maximus coming back from a hard-fought battle to be reunited with his emperor. How about The Matrix? Starting with a call and discussion as to whether or not Neo was really the one. Audiences of today do not have the patience for you to take your time with the pleasantries of days gone by. They want you to jump right in with the good stuff. They want to be hooked right from the beginning. And if we want to create a presentation that moves, that is what we must do. Seems like a big, scary task. How do we immediately get our audiences to engage with us and start attaching what we have to say deep in their memory? Before we can answer that question, we need to make sure we understand the human mind. You see, our mind is beautiful and complex, and it's also systematic. Which means if you understand how the mind works, you can make what you have to say more able to be remembered. Okay. So a little anatomy lesson. You see, the brain is divided up into sections or regions. Each region of the brain has a different function. And there is one specific section of the brain that we are interested in. It's called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the part of the brain that is involved in memory forming, organizing, and storing. Actually, it's a memory indexer. What it does is it takes in new information, identifies where, or if, it should be stored, and later, when given a trigger, it retrieves the information so that we can remember what it had stored. See why it's an important part of the brain for us to pay attention to? Let me show you the power of this hippocampus with these 4 words. Mary had a little. What word immediately came to your mind? Lamb, right? I just said 4 words that have no relationship to the word lamb except for a little song that we have heard and sang hundreds of times. This phrase has been indexed nicely in our brain, and when this 4-word trigger was given to us, we couldn't help but think, lamb. This is what we want our audience to do. When the right trigger is received, we want the hippocampus to go out and retrieve what we have talked about. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, there are 2 ways. First, we can create an event or experience so impactful that it will create its own and new index section in the brain. This is a pretty big feat. This does not happen too often in life, and even less often in presentations. So the second way is we can tie what we are saying to something that is already neatly indexed in our audience's mind. When we do this, we can effectively have a person think about both lambs and you when they hear Mary had a little. This is done by using what I call a hip opening. A hip opening is beginning your presentation with a story, saying, activity, or anything that is already ingrained in the mind of your audience and tying your main point to that already indexed memory. The problem is that our main point and the audience we are presenting to are completely different for everyone listening to this video. So the challenge or opportunity this creates is that you will need to come up with your very own hip opening. To help you, I want to talk through the 4 keys to a successful hip opening and give you a couple examples of hip openings I have recently created for my clients. You with me? Okay, here we go. The 4 keys to effective hip openings are: it has to be memorable, simple, related, and appropriate. Let's look at each of these one at a time. Memorable. This is really the point of the whole idea. When we come up with a good hip opening, it needs to be one that is easily remembered. And like I said before, we can create our own memory, which is challenging, or we can attach to an already existing memory. This is what we're trying to do. So when you are thinking of a hip opening, try to think of a story, saying, activity, hobby, or event that your audience already knows about, and build your opening around that. Simple. What is the opposite of simple? Complex, right? We need to keep our hip opening simple. If we come up with a really complex or elaborate example that takes a long time to explain before we can make our point, we'll lose our audience. If it takes you 5 to 10 minutes to explain your hip opening, you will have blown it, and your audience will have checked out mentally. Your people will go down a different or creative road with you only so far. And then they'll say, nope, I'm out. But if you make sure that your hip opening is simple, easy to explain and understand, they'll hang with you and be happy they did. Related. Other than making sure your hip opening is memorable, making it related is the most important key. You see, there are lots of index memories your audience has. You can tell great stories, paint beautiful images in the mind, and conjure up many long-term memories. But if you can't effectively link what your main point is to what you helped your audience remember, you'll lose the power of the hip opening. There needs to be a clear and direct link between your hip opening and your main point. If there isn't, then go back to the drawing board and come up with a different one. Now, the link does not have to be completely clear initially to your audience. In fact, it's really effective when it isn't. But just as I said, it has to be very simple for you to provide that clarity. Actually, this reveal can be a powerful aha moment for your audience right out of the gate and really draw them in for the rest of your talk. Appropriate. I often feel this can go without saying, and then I see someone come back with a hip opening that reminds me, I need to say it. Your hip opening needs to be appropriate. The challenge with this is that many times our mind locks down the edgy and inappropriate things in life. As a presenter, you need to really evaluate your audience and what they feel is appropriate. They are the judges. And if they think you stepped over the line, then they'll write you off right from the beginning. And you definitely don't want that. It's best to stay far away from the off-color line when coming up with your hip opening. Also, make sure you look at it from different gender, age, religious, and ethnicity perspectives. Keep in mind what the goal is: to have your audience remember and to remember you in a positive light. But the other part of evaluating if your hip opening is appropriate is to look at the tone. This is an opportunity to have your audience laugh so hard they are crying. But you don't want to do that if you're going to talk about a very serious civil issue of the day. At the same time, you don't want to conjure up sad or angering emotions if you're going to talk about the cute things toddlers do. Make sure your hip opening and your message are an appropriate match. So again, we want our hip opening to be memorable, simple, related, and appropriate. All right, sometimes the best way to get our heads around a new way of opening our presentation is to see a couple examples. So I want to share with you 2 hip openings I put together for some clients of mine here recently. Both of these presentations were sales presentations, and it was a very significant change in the way these groups started their presentations. But keep in mind, the movies of the 2000s have significantly changed from the movies of the 1940s. Okay, the first example was a company who sells customer relationship management software to tractor and agricultural equipment dealers. Their target audience is farmers, and they are trying to get these individuals to really change their current systems and use my client's new technology. So I came up with the hip opening that said this: remember the old adage, your corn should be knee-high by the 4th of July? At this point, the people in the agricultural industry will be nodding their heads and smiling because they do. The presenter goes on. Have you noticed how high the corn usually is by the 4th of July these days? And typically the presenter would get the answer of chest high, to which they would respond with this question: yeah, why is that? It is because we in the agricultural industry have taken our old methods and added technology to bring about bigger gain. And what I would like to talk to you about today is how you can move your profits from knee-high to chest-high by adding our technology to your business. You see, this very simple but powerful opening has just anchored my client to an adage that everyone in his or her audience already has locked in their long-term memory. And what it has done is made it so that every time my clients' prospects see a cornfield chest high during the first part of July, they will literally think of my client and remember what they were selling. Powerful stuff. Here's another example. This client sells patient self-service kiosks and mobile access options to hospitals. Their product can help the hospitals increase their bottom line and increase patient satisfaction at the same time. So I put together this hip opening for them. Don't you hate it when you come up to the dessert table at a nice event and you see both your favorite cake and your favorite pie? You look around and realize that it's not going to look good if you take both a piece of cake and pie. These are some of life's quote-unquote tough decisions. Which do I choose? Now, this created a picture in the mind of the audience of a situation that we've all been in. It also puts a more playful spin on the struggles of every hospital. These decisions get much more challenging when you are trying to provide top-notch patient care. You want to increase patient satisfaction and increase your bottom line. Sometimes you can't walk away from these quote-unquote dessert tables with both. But the good news is, I would like to show you how today, with our solution, you can have your cake and eat it too. This hip opening brought to mind the struggles of a decision of dessert and how you would love to just be able to grab both the cake and the pie, and related it to the fact that my client's solution is going to give them the ability to do that when dealing with a much more serious life decision. Who do you think will come to mind the next time they have dessert? Hip openings are a beautiful way to use the complexity and beauty of your audience's mind to lock you and what you have to say into their long-term memory. So when you plan your next presentation that moves, make sure you are not like the filmmakers of the 1940s. But start with a memorable hook like the movies of today. Once you have your audience's attention and you have been indexed in their memory, how do you start them on the journey of moving to where you want them to go? This is what we'll solve in tomorrow's video. If you would like to run your new hip opening by one of our presentation gurus, sign up for Spotted Rhino Design's one-on-one customized presentation review called the Presentation Pulse. During your one-on-one review would be the perfect time to make sure your presentation opens with a memorable bang.